Come on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We're running up a little bit late, 3 minutes late. Okay. Audio, everything's good. Share. All right. Looks good. Okay, so we're going to be going over, I'm going to be introducing some new materials in the lecture, but we're going to be going over some things that we did last week and strengthen some skills that we were introduced to a little bit, but we can definitely get better at. And the better we get at these different tools, the faster we'll be at executing our designs in Adobe Illustrator. And that kind of works obviously within every software. You don't have to be about the software, but if you know it really well, then you can really transfer your ideas really, really quickly to the computer. So we're going to be focusing on that. All right, awesome. So class 7. And today we're going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson, just a little bit, but we're going to see how that ties into different things that we've been learning up until now. So this was probably a nice way to sum up the state of graphic design, of visual design in like the 1800s, the late 1800s, the very start of the industrial era, right? We have goods being sold out of their immediate locale. We have people buying things from different countries. They're being packaged, maybe the first introduction of the logo, things being the very basic start of like advertising and marketing and things like that. And this is what ads are looking like, right? It looks almost like architectural, like there's, I don't know, I forgot what they're called, moldings, right? It feels like there's a physical element to it. I'm not actually sure if this is actually that, but this is what it looked like, meaning this could have been someone's recreation of an old advertisement. So pull that up, okay. And also guys, remember to put your questions in the Q&A chat if you have any. Okay, so this is what advertising looked like. In the late 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? And everything feels very aristocratic. It feels kind of referencing like who's in power at the time, kings and monarchies. And you have businesses wanting to align themselves with that kind of regal, royal power. And that was probably what people wanted to be at the time. And it's important to recognize this because this was a pattern that was prevalent then, and this was a pattern that made sense at that time. And the designer here kind of like understood what would appeal to people at that time, what would appeal to people to buy insurance from this company. And they used these different motifs from maybe tapestries and different things like that. And we get to do a similar thing. We get to imagine what would our target customer, the person that we're trying to reach and engage with, what appeals to them? What do they find engaging? And that is a very tricky part. So this is what they found engaging at that time, right? So starting at that time, there was an introduction of something called the Swiss style, like in the early, like immediately following World War I. there was this understanding that machines would forever change the economy, and people slowly getting on that bandwagon kind of, and you have many more people owning businesses. You have a lot more free trade, right? Different countries passing resources to each other a lot more openly. And in general, the world kind of got a lot smaller because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the introduction of machinery and automation into a lot of what was up until that time very like crafted and done by hand. So the Swiss style started as a kind of a graphic language in response to this, to be like, you know what, graphic design should not, or I don't know if it was even called graphic design at the time, but the language that we use to communicate with our customers or other people should not just be limited to like what the king's palace looks like, or what the leadership of our country looks like. It should be more universal. It should be maybe even a little more automated, a little less, you know, human and a little more machine-like. And so that was something that's when something called the Swiss style started growing. But then World War II happened, which totally destroyed any sort of semblance of what people had, like, oh, you know, we're in a new era. Or more like immediately following World War II is when people really wanted the messages of the Swiss style to be true. There's messages of like order and modernity and, you know, an international kind of collective of like an international language almost. So introducing the Swiss style, also known as the International Typographic Style, and we can see it in the name. I'm going to call it the Swiss style. We could see it in the name that it was meant to be something that could cross boundaries, cross languages almost. That could be the format and the layout and the pattern, the visual pattern, the code could be used in every country for every message. And the person who popularized it, his name was Ernest Keller. I think it was, do I have a year? I'm not sure. Ernest Keller, he was a professor. It was called, I think, the Basel School of Design in Sweden. Yeah, I think that's right. And his whole way of teaching, instead of just teaching people how to make stuff, which was the, up until that point, how visual designers were taught, they were like, okay, make this, make that, make that. He was a lot more about the strategy almost. And a lot of what he taught was like almost the foundation of what design is today. I mean, you can't really trace it back, but it introduced this idea that, right, let's read the quote, the solution to the design problem should emerge from its content. Meaning, instead of us trying to impress a certain style on the information and what we're trying to communicate, let's try to see what are we trying to communicate, what is it saying, and then how do we express that, okay? So this is a poster, an example of a poster of the Swiss style. Okay, so there are a couple of defining elements of the Swiss style, and we're going to talk about them. Well, the first thing, obviously, is that we probably don't see something like this in our daily lives. So I'm not really showing you something and being like, oh, look, this is something you should immediately copy. I'm more like showing it to you to show that there are certain things that we use nowadays that were introduced at that time, and they were still trying to figure it out. And this is something that we've kind of become so familiar with that it seems like, you know, boring or stupid. But at the time, this was like revolutionary, right? Compared to that very royal, complicated, detailed, like advertisement for the insurance company. This is very pared back and very kind of objective feeling, right? It doesn't really feel like it's saying a lot. Maybe it's a little flat to our eyes. So the first thing that the Swiss style really introduced was the use of grids. They were really into it, right? We spoke about being machine-like, being objective. It's like, oh, there's a pre-existing system. You could hand it off to any designer and they could employ it. They could follow the grid. And so there was this introduction of like this machine-like automated idea of design. The next thing that was very popular in Swiss design, that was really made popular in Swiss design, was the use of sans serif, right? So while serif typefaces, the typefaces with little feet on it, they kind of felt very warm, very traditional. Serif typefaces were designed to, they felt like they were designed by machines. They felt like they had less personality. They felt like they were all about the message and not about what the form, right? So it's just about what is it saying? Tell it to me straight, right? So the use of sans serif typefaces were very, very popular. Another thing they also use, if we see that all of the text is flush left, except the poster all the way on the right, all the text is flush left. And that was also something they were like, no fancy tricks with the typography. Keep it flush left. It's easy to read, and that's it. Again, let the content, let the message itself be the thing that people are reading and focusing on, and not so much the design, the illustration. So to talk a little bit about kind of the philosophy of the Swiss style was that they use like a math problem, right? Or like the structure that defines a math problem. You only use specific equations for specific types of problems. So so that's kind of the same. I'm trying to explain that. Meaning that you're not trying to introduce things that don't immediately have to do with the problem. You don't end up using math formulas that don't will not immediately drive the answer that you want. And so that was kind of the same thing that they were going for. Okay, so the sans serif typefaces, flush left, rag right, rag right. And then the final thing was that when they did include illustrations and photography, it was very simple, no tricks, right? Very simple, no tricks, not very complicated geometric shapes, very simple color. Again, they were just saying like, say what it is and then move on. Let's not over focus on the, who's in power and trying to convince you of something that much. Okay, so, right, 3 things, or kind of 4 things, right? We have the use of grids that made the Swiss style popular. We have the use of sans serif typefaces and aligning the copy, aligning the type to be flush left. And then finally, the very simple, uncomplicated use of photography and shapes. So we've spoken quite a bit about grids, right? And this is obviously a rhetorical question, but does nature use a grid? Does nature use some predefined system of shapes to kind of determine how things, how it develops? So some people like to believe it does. It's not a very convincing case to say that there's kind of a consistent pattern of shapes. What it's called. Some people say like something like fractals, which I don't know. I don't understand it that well, math stuff. But does nature use a grid? Well, some people say it does. And someone named Leonard Bonacci in 1838, he introduced something called the Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci sequence was what he claimed to be this very natural sequence of numbers where you had the number, let me try to explain this. You have 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. And then you always add how do we explain this? Okay, right, so you have 1 plus 1 is 2, and then 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5. So you have the new number and then the number to the left of it, and you add it together, and you kind of increase in increments. So what is this? The reason why I'm explaining this, I don't have a deep understanding of this equation, but what ends up happening is that it introduces a very interesting kind of shape that we can use in our design work, and that we're gonna apply this in the practice, in the exercise time. Exit time, like when we exercise. Okay, never mind. When we practice in Illustrator. So what do these numbers all mean when it comes to something like this? We have a shape like this, right? We have a shape like this. 1 + 1 is 2. 2 + 3 is 5. And then you have these shapes that increase in very they double in, I don't even know if it's doubling in size, but they increase in a way and that they fit together very harmoniously and very beautifully. And a lot of times when we use a grid like this, that can be an easy way to kind of have a very beautiful flow of information. And this is very popular in photography. It's very popular in, like, oh, look how the golden ratio, which is what this is called, right? This kind of graphic of the Fibonacci sequence is called the golden ratio. And people like to show how it's like it appears in like fine art and photography, etc. So I wanted to show you, we are going to end up making the Fibonacci grid in Illustrator, but I also wanted to show you kind of a simplified version of the Fibonacci grid. Another also rule from photography called the rule of thirds, or more like just dividing something into thirds, which is that you divide your space into 3 areas and then you choose where the main content is going to sit. So let's say, you have 2/3 that represents one thing, and then green another, and then you have this kind of system where you can choose how to allocate 2/3 to one kind of element, and we're going to practice this as well. Okay, it's very simple, and this is an example of how it appears in an ad, from the 70s or 50s. We have this large image which takes up 2/3 roughly, and then the bottom, the copy of the ad takes up 1/3. Okay, so I wanted to go over a couple of things that we spoke about last week about the grid. Okay, so we have this plane, we have this space, and then we have kind of invisible guides that kind of tell us where we shouldn't be putting information. And that's completely up to us. It's flexible. No one actually ends up seeing this, although they do see the space that we left, but they don't see any of the grids or measurements that we laid down. So this pink area represents the margin, right? The margin is the space from the edge of our content to the edge of the page. And it allows for us to kind of have some space for us to read, because if we had our content right against the edge of the page, first, it probably would get cut off, but also it would make for a very overbearing and difficult visual experience. And the next things we have columns, which are vertical areas, vertical spaces for us to put our text. And then finally, something that we didn't talk about yet is the gutter. And that's these awful neon green. The gutter is the space in between our columns. So we have kind of different levels of leaving space. We have the margin, we have the column, and then we have the gutter. The gutter is the space between the columns, so that we kind of let our content, we let our design breathe. So nothing usually goes in the gutter and nothing usually goes in the margin. We keep our content, we keep our design within the columns. And we can have, it's don't feel limited. I'm showing only 3 columns, but it could be 12, it could be 24, 8, 6. It could be as many columns as you'd like, as long as there's a consistency of some sort. Okay, so great. So I am going to open Illustrator. Okay, we're going to open Illustrator and I'm going to create a new document. You can do that by clicking the create new or Control N or Command N. Let me just go doing. Okay, so I'm going to create a letter size document. I do that by going to print, letter, create. Okay, and then I'm going to use Control-0 on my keyboard to center my current artboard at the center of my screen. Okay, so the first thing I want us to practice or to go over is how are we going to make a margin? Oh, let me share. I'm not sharing. Sorry. Okay, so I wanted to go over making a margin and making a 3-column grid with gutters, right? So we can see that we don't see my rulers here. So there are 2 ways to do that. We go to View, and we scroll all the way down to Rulers, and we can use Show Rulers, or we can toggle the view of our rulers by pressing Control-R, right? And we see that this exactly what looks like a ruler appears on my top part of my workspace and on my left. And you press Control-R, well, you can hold down Control and then press R and it comes on. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to make margins. We want to make 3 columns. And if you would like, you can make more than 3. And then I want to make a gutter. Okay, so I'm not employing any sort of formula to decide the size of these things. I just want to show you how to do it. And when it's important, and it is important at times, to come up with exact, precise measurements of what the margins should be, or what size the margin should be of the columns and the gutters. But I don't want to focus on that right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make a my smart guides aren't on. You could turn on your smart guides, which are these very helpful kind of exactly what it sounds like, smart guides, by pressing Control-U on your keyboard and not letting, or going to View and scrolling down to Smart Guides and making sure that there's a little blue box checked next to it. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to make a couple of margins, and that's the space again all the way around the page. It should be consistent, or we're going to make it consistent here, and generally it should be consistent. So with my rulers shown, we also have to show, so from the rulers we can pull something called guides, and the guides also have to be visible. You can have your rulers visible without your guides being visible. And that might sound complicated, but so I can right click anywhere and I can press show guides, right? And what that means is that when I lay down a guide, it will be visible to me. If I right click and press hide guides, it will disappear. Ooh, that's what I want. Show guides. You don't want to show grid, you want to show guides, right? And there's also something called locking and unlocking your guides, which means that as long as your guides are unlocked, they're completely editable and you can move them around as you like. But the point of guides really is to have a set kind of space to work within, and you usually don't want to move that around too much. So the way to lock it is first you can just right click and lock. Then I think it's that. I forgot the shortcut for it. That's okay. Okay, so now I have my margins down. Now I want to make 3 columns, but within those 3 columns, I want to make gutters, right? Which is the running space between the columns that the running space between columns that I want to keep kind of empty. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I just made a box bigger, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do in a second. So I want you to have something that looks like this, a big square and then kind of a smaller square, but not too small for the merit of this example. Okay, so with this kind of ratio, this big and small, I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to, I'm selecting both of them. I'm holding I'm holding both of them, and then I'm holding down Alt and Shift as I drag both of them until we have that kind of magenta line that tells me that they're meeting at the edge. And I'm going to do the same thing again. Actually, I don't want that gutter over there. Okay, so this is what I want to end up having. I want to end up having 3 bigger squares and then 2 smaller squares running in between them. Because a gutter is a gutter only when a gutter is something that runs in between columns, not in between a margin and a column. So now that I have these shapes, I'm going to select all of them by dragging over them, just dragging. And then I'm going to hold Shift and scale both of them up. Okay. I'm going to copy it just in case. And now I'm going to set down my guides. These are very big margins. Okay. Now, I'm curious if anyone has a question. Someone just typed in, Kaya, you just typed in Hebrew. I don't know what that says. It also doesn't look like you. Did you intend to do that? I don't know. Sure, slower. Yes, okay, so let's turn that off. So we've done this, we've copied squares before, right? We've copied squares before, we've done it quite a few times. Right now, what I want to be doing is I'm making a square. It doesn't matter what size it is. I'm making it this size. Doesn't matter. All you have to do, and I'll show you over here, holding M, I'm making a geometric square. And then when I want to make a copy, there are a few ways to do it. You can use your keyboard shortcuts, or you can you can select the shape, Control C, go to Edit, and there's different options, pasting options with your shape selected. Go to different pasting options, go to Edit, and you can do paste in front, let's say, okay? And now, although it doesn't look like it, you have 2 squares right on top of each other. And I'm just holding Shift to keep it going in a straight line on a strict horizontal axis. And now I have these 2 squares right next to each other, okay? And I'm going to scale one of those squares down simply by selecting it, holding Shift, and then hovering over one of the far right kind of points of my shape. So that's what I have, okay? And then to duplicate it, because I want a few columns, I'm going to select both of them just like that, dragging over both of them, making sure I'm selecting both of them. And then again, I can hold Alt Shift while I'm dragging, or I could do exactly what I did before. I can go to Control C, go to Edit, paste in front. There's also a shortcut for that, right? And now I just duplicated it, and we can do the exact same thing again. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control F, and now I have these boxes, which will be the kind of where I will set my. We're going to make 3 columns. We're making 3 columns here, and if you look at my screen, you can see that that's what I did. And we don't want to gutter to the right of our box over here. So again, I'm going to delete that. Okay. So that's what I wanted to go over. The next thing I wanted to go over is importing images. Okay, importing images, and then we're also going to go over making a clipping mask, which is something that we went over last week. Okay, so let me first. Where's the mouse? I'm going to open the file that we had used last class. Nice. Okay, great. And we are going to, or I want to show you just consistency's sake, how to recreate this, right? So I'm using an image of the moon, but it's a perfect circle, which I'm sure there's some way to get this kind of image with a transparent background off the internet, but I'm going to show you how to do it manually so that you can recreate this kind of effect on your own. You set a guide by dragging out from the ruler. Someone asked a question about setting the guide. You drag out from the ruler, and if you don't see it, it means you have to show guides, which is by right-clicking. And it says show guides. Then you'll hopefully see them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, first thing that I'm going to do, Okay, so I have this image in the Google Drive, and I'm going to share that link right now. And I have to see the chat. Okay, I'm going to I'm pasting the link into the chat, and it should be accessible to everybody. And the way you download an image is you right-click on it. It's just called Moon, I believe. I can show you how to do that. Okay. Okay, so I'm in the, let's say I click the link. I'm in a general class folder. And I'm going to go to class 7, moon.jpg. I can right click, and then there's a little download button, and they'll automatically download the image for me. And I'll send it to my downloads folder. Okay. Okay, great. So how do we import an image? If anyone, we're going to go over this really quickly. It's really useful. So there are a few ways to import an image into Illustrator. You can copy paste it, which is Control-C, Control-V, or right-click copy, right-click paste. You could drag it in from a folder on your computer, but I'm going to show you the kind of a manual way to do it. So we'll go to File, File, Place, right? File, Place, or Shift Control P. So File, Place, the file, the top left-hand menu, drop-down menu, place. Then I'm going to go to downloads. And I have this image of the moon, right, that we downloaded from Google Drive. Now, what we see here is that it's showing my cursor is kind of loaded, quote unquote, with an image. And in order to set that image down, so first if I click, I have this giant image because that's the full size of the image. But I don't really want that. It's going to be kind of, I mean, let's redo that. Just to show you what happens, right? So I click, and now I have this giant full-size image of the moon, much bigger than I want. So like, oh no, what do I do? So you can, couple of things you can do. Well, the one thing I would do is Control minus, and that kind of zooms you out all the way, and then you can resize it just like you would a regular rectangle. Or I think even a more efficient way is to let's place that image again. And then I could just draw how big I want that shape to be, okay? Oop. And I have to hold shift if I want, that did not work. I'll hold shift to maintain kind of the size. Okay, so was everyone able to import their image? Yes? Great. Awesome. Annoying noises. Okay, so we have an image, I placed it, and I didn't just plop it and get this giant image. We're going to go over the columns. We're going to get back to the columns, okay? So we set down this giant, set down this image, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to make something called a clipping mask. A clipping mask is basically using a closed shape inside of within Illustrator to contain something else. So you can contain another shape in a clipping mask. You can contain an image. You can contain text. You could put anything inside of a clipping mask, and then the object in back of the clipping mask will then confine to the limitations of that shape. So now all of that abstract mumbo jumbo, we're going to make a clipping mask of this moon to be a perfect circle. So we know how to make a perfect circle. We can go to the left-hand panel and use the ellipse tool, or you can press L on your keyboard. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and hold shift to make a circle, and it doesn't have to be perfectly to the edge. Hi, Sarah. Can you post your question into the Q&A? That'd be great. Okay, so now I have this like image stuck on top of my shape stuck on top of my image. And what I'm going to do now is select both of them. I'm going to select the image and the shape. So one way is I can just, right, the way we've done it before, is move my mouse over both elements. You shrink an image just like you would shrink a rectangle. You hold shift and you just pull the sides in to make it the size that you want it to make. Someone had a question, how do you shrink the image again? So that's how you do it. Okay, so now, but another thing you can do is you can also hold shift. So I'm going to select one image, and then while holding shift, I can select another image or another object. Two objects can be selected. You can do this, right? You can move your mouse over both of them, but maybe you have a lot of stuff. Maybe in one of your designs, you can have a lot of stuff around. So you can just select the image, or vice versa, you can select the shape, and then while holding shift down, you can select the image. And now you have these two objects selected at the same time, which means that whatever you apply will be applied to both of them. Okay, so an important rule is that the container for your clipping mask has to be on top of whatever you want to. Blue X over my image. Can you, someone said that they have a blue X over their image and it doesn't let them move the image. I wonder why that would be. That's weird. Can you try to Control Z? Can you like undo importing the image and then redo it? I'm not sure why you're seeing an X. It's hard for me to troubleshoot. Okay, so let's continue on. So I'm selecting both of them and I'm going to hold shift, select both of them. Okay, then I can right click. When I right click, I'm presented with an option to group, which you've spoken about a little bit, but I'm going to make a clipping mask. Okay, boom. And now I have this kind of perfectly spherical moon because I made a clipping mask. But what I have to do is I first have to make a shape, and then I have to put that shape on top of the object I wanted to clip, right? So we could really make a clipping mask. I'm going to bring up my type tool just for illustration. And I can make a clipping mask out of anything. Okay, the shortcut to make a clipping mask is Control-7. So so let me go over that. I could select my shape, my holding shape that has to be on top, and then select my content, the thing that will be inside my clipping mask, and that will be on bottom. And then I can press Control-7 and I get the same thing. Now you could also release your clipping mask the same way you made it. You can right click. I wonder if you can, I don't know the shortcut for undoing a clipping mask, but I right click and I release clipping mask. I'm not sure there is a shortcut for releasing clipping mask. So release it, okay? Simple as that. And so what happens now is that now we have if you kind of move your mouse carefully over to the spot where that original shape was, you'll see that it lost all color properties. It doesn't have any fill. It doesn't have any outline. And I think that's because it's indicating that this has now become a clipping mask. So just know that when you release a clipping mask, your holding shape will lose all of its color properties that you applied to it. But you can always reapply it. You can always reapply those elements, right? I just filled my circle in again with black. So I just want to show you what happens when the image is on top. When the image is on top, I can go to Arrange, Bring to Front. I did that by right-clicking, going down to Arrange, Bring to Front, or Shift, Control, right square bracket. And now when I select both of my elements, I can't make a clipping mask, right? Well, specifically because this image is not a path. But let's do that. Okay, I have a circle. I think it's just a good idea if you would watch me do it, just so you can kind of understand how it works a little bit. Okay, so we have this image. Oh, I'm sorry, a shape. And let me make a square. And going to make my square red and make my circle yellow. Okay, so I have these two objects. I'm going to move them over there for later. Okay, so when my square is on top and I right click, make clipping mask, then the square becomes the frame. That's a good way to call it. It's a frame. And then the circle becomes kind of the elements inside of the frame. And then, and I'm bringing my circle up by, you can do that in two ways. You can right click and arrange, bring to front. And now let's do that again, right? And now the circle has become the frame. So it depends on what's on top. And you can make many, I think you could make many clipping masks. Now, another really interesting thing is that once you made a clipping mask, you can right click, sorry. You can right click, so you select your clipping mask like I'm doing here. You can right click and then isolate selected clipping mask. Okay, what that means is that now you are inside of the clipping mask and you're not editing anything outside of the clipping mask. It's called being in isolation mode. And when you're in isolation mode, you'll know that you are in isolation mode because there's going to be a gray bar that appears on top with a couple of different pieces of information. It tells you what layer you want, and also, oh, that's interesting. I never did that before. And lets you toggle through layers. Okay, so I'm in the isolation mode, which I did by right-clicking, well, selecting my object, my clipping mask, and then right-clicking. And now I can move my image around in the frame, and then I could go a level deeper. I don't want to get into that right now. Okay, so is everyone able to make a clipping mask? No. What trouble are people coming across when they're trying to make a clipping mask? If anyone is coming in. And also I'm curious if people solve the problem with the blue X over their image. I definitely would want to see what happened there. I normally don't get blue X's over my image. Okay, so there's kind of just a very few simple rules about making a clipping mask. You have to have an object under, and then you have to have an object on top. Okay, I'm going to go over the clipping mask one more time, and I think instead of following along, just watch as I do it. Okay, so let's just work with this. Okay, so let's just work with this this moon image. Okay, so I have my moon image here, and I'm going to make a circle by I'm going to press L on my keyboard to pull up the ellipse tool, and I'm going to place it over my over my moon image, and now I have a closed path, a closed shape on top of the photograph. Okay, and now I'm going to select both of them, just like I would select two boxes or any other objects. Select both of them and right click. When I do that, I get a couple of options that I could, edit the two selections. What I'm going to do is make a clipping mask. Okay, and that's how we do that. And I can right click to release clipping mask. Okay. Seems like the majority got it. I definitely want to go over how to do this if anyone is having trouble, but I also want to introduce another new thing, which is alignment and distribution. Okay. Put all this white. Okay, so I'm going to make 3 basic boxes. Okay, 3 boxes. It's just because we're talking about alignment here. Okay, so we have 3 boxes, and I want to edit them. So first, I think everyone is don't follow along just yet. Watch my screen, watch the process, and then we're going to go over. We're going I'll go over it again, and we can do it step by step. So the first thing that happens when I personally on my workspace, when I select a bunch of shapes, is I get a bunch of options over here. Okay, but just in case someone doesn't see that, I'm going to go to Window. You don't have to select your shapes to do this. I'm going to go to Window, and just right in the A's, because it's it's in alphabetical order, I'm going to click Align, and a little box pops up. It says Align at the top, and it gives me a bunch of different options. So I wanted to go over this and make sure that everyone knows how to do this to get their designs looking really good and orderly. Okay, so with all of my shapes selected, indicating that I'm going to edit the properties of those shapes in some way, we can start aligning things. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is, let's say I want to align all of my objects flush left. Okay, so I do that simply by, there's a shape here that tells us, right? Horizontal align left, horizontal align center, horizontal align right. And any of the shapes that you edit will be aligned in that way. Now, there might be some people who are having trouble with this because there is actually, you can decide what you're aligning your objects to. So kind of the default way that you align things is, let's bring our attention to the bottom right corner of our align window toolbar. And there it says a little title, align to, and then there's like a drop down menu with 3 options. So let's select my 4 squares. And now align to, I have 3 different options. So align to selection just means that it's going to align all of the objects that I selected to the left. Right? I guess to the shape that's furthest left. Then there's align to key object. Align to key object means that you are selecting a single shape to align everything else to. Okay, so let's just make this let's make this example a little more. Okay, so I have a bunch of shapes over here. So I can select all of them and then just align right, and it aligns it to the object that's align left, and it aligns it to the object that's furthest left. Or I could select all of my shapes and then holding Alt, you can choose a key object. So let's say I'm going to choose this, and you can see that there's a thick blue line that appears when I hold Alt and click. Right, so I've selected all my shapes that I want to align, and then I select the object I want everything to align to. And automatically, just by using Alt and clicking on the key object, the key shape that I want everything to align to, my alignment little drop down in the bottom right changes from align to selection to align to key object. And then when I click horizontal align left, it aligns everything to that box that I selected. Okay. And then the final thing is that there's align to artboard, which means that it will align all of the shapes to a specific part of the artboard that I choose. So I actually don't have an artboard here, but if I click align to artboard, where'd it go? So I have an artboard somewhere over here. Oh, none of these are artboards. Okay, that's confusing. Let me make this more clear. Okay, I'm gonna make an artboard really quickly. I'm gonna put my shapes on top of that artboard. And now when I click align Do we see that? It moved to the far left, and it also applies if I take a clipping mask, right? Now there's a line center, which is pretty self-explanatory. A line center, there's a line middle, a line bottom, a line top, a line left. We can have a ball with this. And so, okay, so then there is how do you distribute objects evenly? Okay, so first, if you're getting like wonky results from your alignment, just make sure that you your align to settings are set to what you want them to be. So I want them to be aligned to selection, which is the default. It basically just means whatever objects you've selected, that's the only things that are going to be influenced by your alignment settings. Okay, so at the bottom, what's it called? At the bottom left corner of our alignment window, there are two elements. One is called vertical distribute space and one's called horizontal. Okay, and if I click the horizontal distribute space, it just adjusted all of my boxes. Let's redo that. Let's make that drastically right here. On a line to the top. So, right, we have these like different boxes over here. So, actually, sorry. Okay, so if I select all of those objects and then I do horizontal distribute space, it just gave an equal amount of space to all of my objects. Okay. Okay, so, and I mean, it works exactly the same way with vertical, even spacing, okay? And there's also, okay, so then you can also add like very specific amounts of space, but only when you're within kind of the align to key object setting. So this is not super important. I kind of just wanted to share for those who wanted to get very precise measurements of their objects. There's a way to do that, but you have to go, you have to select your shape, or you can just go to align. Well, you can't go into, you select all the shapes you want to edit, but align to key object. And now you are able to edit the amount of space. Let's say I do align key object. So I'm in horizontal spacing. Put it on unit of space, and now it gave each shape 80 points of space in between them. Okay. So now I'm curious if people followed along with that, and do people want me to go over that again? And if most people were able to follow along with that, then we'll move on and I can go over it at the end. Someone raised their hand, but I can't, I'm not going to answer that right now. Okay, I will answer it. Not right now. Okay, so that's how we align and distribute things, right? So we have to remember that there's something called align to artboard, which I can imagine if you didn't know about it, could be very frustrating. Why are your objects only aligned to the edges of your artboard? So you have to change your alignment settings. And then there's a very neat way that I just showed you how to distribute elements in a very specific way. If you wanted to, you could do that to create gutters, right? You can decide on a very specific amount of space in between your columns, and you can create gutters if you wish. Okay, now we're going to take a break from this for now, and we're going to go back to our lecture. Okay, so I kind of structured some of these things around the book cover design kind of project that I presented. And I still haven't really figured out a very efficient or good way to work on it because I can't really assign it. I don't want to assign work outside of class. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. But I do want to kind of provide the tools for people who are doing it um, to do the work on their own if they wish. And then I think for everyone else, I think this will be fairly interesting. So this class or this course in general, there's a lot of focus on craft, right? There's a lot of focus on learning how to do stuff. And that is largely because the way I understood this course, the way it was presented to me, was that we're trying to learn how to make design practically in the world, right? So it's not like a theoretical visual design class. It's about like, how can I actually make this stuff? So that's what we're trying to teach. That's what we're trying to learn. But at the same time, it's not only about making stuff, because obviously everyone can have, like anyone in the world can have access to Adobe Illustrator and they can do whatever they want within it. But how do we make those like special, unique, great design things that really got us maybe even interested in the course to begin with, right? So the way I see it, the way I break it down, there's craft and then there's concept. And so there's one like how you actually execute and do it, and right? And you can always get better at that. And you can always get better at typography and always get better at logo design and colors and grids and all of those things. And then there's also the concept. What is kind of your idea? What's your unique approach? How are you doing this in a way that brings joy to people's lives or novelty, enriches your client's business or your client's customers, and those things that doesn't really involve Adobe Illustrator. It doesn't really involve a program. It really involves your way of thinking, your way of approaching visual problems, design problems, right? And that's also something that you can always get better at. You always can come up with better ideas, better approaches, more unique approaches, and then always the craft matters as well, right? If you have a lot of great ideas, but you're not that great at communicating them, it's no one's fault it's no one's responsibility to listen. So there's kind of the way you speak, and then there's also what you're saying. And if you have something unique to say and you're saying it in a unique way, that's like a home run. And if you only have one or the other, you might get off, you might be able to do that for a little bit, but it's always a struggle. So we always want to work on both ends of that spectrum. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about visual balance. Okay, so the first thing is called symmetry. And symmetry is when anything is made up of exactly equal parts all around, or maybe it can be in both sides, or it could be, we could think about a circle. A circle is perfectly symmetrical. Every single part of it is mirrored in every other part, or even a square or a triangle. So in my opinion, true symmetry or symmetry where everything feels really mirrored is a little unnatural, and it's very unusual for us to see, because although nature is symmetrical, it's not symmetrical in a glaringly obvious way. And there are always natural imperfections or natural asymmetrical elements. Asymmetrical is like the opposite of symmetry. And when we design, symmetry is usually not something that we want to go with. We usually want to present something that feels alive, that feels somewhat energetic, and that usually isn't communicated through symmetry. Okay, So this is an example of symmetry, but this is not a true example because although the general proportions of this butterfly are equal, there are definitely differences within it, and therefore there isn't, I don't know, and within nature, a true butterfly wouldn't really have perfect shape and perfect colors on both sides. Okay, and this is an example of asymmetry. This is an example where we expect the one side of the apple to be reflected on the other, and it's cut out, and that actually makes it very interesting. That makes it memorable, and it's usually those things that stick out at us and kind of grab something of our attention, whether it's really interesting or very beautiful or very unique. Those are things that usually sear themselves into our, okay? So this is going to reflect in how we lay out information. This is going to reflect in how we lay out designs. Okay, and so now I want to talk a little bit about, we spoke about this way earlier on, but we spoke about hierarchy. And I want to talk about how when we look at a design, the first thing we really see, like our primal eyeballs, we just see shapes. And we're always looking for the most important shapes, the most important colors, generally the most important visual information. And we want to pick out what's important, and we want to set aside what isn't that important, right? And so we have to understand that when we create designs, when we create layouts, we have to first give attention to the most important thing. It not necessarily is the most important thing the title, or not necessarily is the most important thing the client's logo. Sometimes the most important thing is whatever always the most important thing is whatever needs to be seen first. And the need has to be determined before we start designing, okay? A lot of times, like flyers or posters about events, the date is the biggest, because people, first thing they want to know is, when is this going to happen? Is this even relevant to me? Do I have a dentist appointment at that time? Right? If you have this whole flyer about an event, and at the bottom, very small, is the date, you're getting people all excited, and then they realize they can't show up because they have something else scheduled. So the best thing to do, right, just as a rule of thumb, is to focus on the date and the time. So the first thing that we do, is, well, within a design, there's generally 3 levels of importance. There's the most important thing, which isn't always, it doesn't have to be one, it doesn't have to be one word. It could be maybe a paragraph, but it's kind of categorized. You have category 1, most important, should be treated first. Category 2, somewhat important. It maybe the details to category 1, and then category 3 is the details that if people missed out on it, it wouldn't be a huge problem. Okay, so this is an example of, I just made this up on the spot, but this is an example. You have the biggest, the most important, you have the second important, and you have the third, right? And as always, we're thinking about, and again, we presented this before, but as always, we're thinking about the way the eye reads, and we're putting the most important information at the first place that our target audience, our audience, is going to look at. And we're following the rules. We're going to use when we design, we're going to use this idea of a zigzag, maybe, or we're going to use this idea of a top to bottom design, and putting our most important information at the top and moving down. Okay. Okay. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, kind of the first step in talking about concepts. Okay, so I'm opening up Illustrator, opening it back up. And I wanted to introduce some new things. And then maybe go back to grids and design. I just want to make sure that we cover some basic tools in Illustrator so that you guys can have a level of creative freedom when you're working on your own. So let's talk about this poster, or whatever you want to call it. So we have this circle, right? Now we know that for most of us, if we tried to do this, we would have a solid circle, right? It wouldn't have this, what we call transparency, right? You can see we still have that yellow, but it also lays on top and it shows through what's under it. So this is a fun thing to do. So, all right, so we have this. Make another circle. So we have our moon, and somehow my circle is already yellow. And how am I going to let this top yellow circle show through? So there's something called blending modes. Blending modes are very cool. So let's go to Window. And I forgot what this is called. Okay, I just want to make sure everyone has it open, but it's called transparency. And we're going to go down all the way down to the T's, transparency. Okay. Now, again, we have to select the object to edit its properties, but within transparency, there are a couple of cool things, and I'm going to show you 2 out of the 3 cool things. So the first is we have something called opacity. Opacity means that we can control how dense, I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but how opaque a shape is. Opaque means not letting something else show through, I believe. So 100% means it's 100% opaque, means that you cannot see anything behind it. But as you move, right, so if I want to edit the opacity, I click on that little arrow right there, and this little slider shows up with the blue ball. And I can move, I can edit the amount of translucency or transparency that my shape will have by moving it. 0 means that it's 100% translucent. It shows everything. It shows through everything that's behind it. 100% means that it isn't. And then there's, okay, so that's, I feel like that's fairly simple. And then you can put in certain amounts. You can put in 50%. You could just type in a number as well. 50. Now that's 50%. So again, with my shape selected, there's this little drop-down menu. And this drop-down menu, I actually don't have like a keen understanding of how it works. I'm familiar with what all of these categories do, but I don't know if I could explain very exactly what each setting actually does, you know, kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. But the first thing, and the one that I used in my poster, is I clicked on multiply. So if you clicked on that, it shows through a little bit and it reacts to the color, to the objects underneath. Okay, and you can select anything you want, overlay, difference. Okay. And then if you don't like anything that you did, you can just go to normal, and that will tell you that your blending mode is normal. And these are all basically different levels or different ways of transparency. So they're all interacting with the shape underneath, versus when it's normal, it's basically just 2 shapes on top of each other, and they have nothing, 2 objects on top of each other, and they have nothing to do with each other. Okay, did everyone get the hang of that? Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So I used a blending mode, which that's what we're calling it. It's called multiply. Multiply is a pretty popular one, and you can see that with the selected, it tells me that my yellow circle is on multiply on top of my moon image. Okay, so now there's another thing that I wanted to introduce, and obviously we're not going to master it now, but it's called the Pathfinder tool. So again, we're going to go to Window, all the way down to the P's. We have Pathfinder. I'm going to pull that window out so we can see. Okay, so the Pathfinder window is the different ways that we could cut or join different shapes together. You can't join an image and a shape, or you can't really, outside of a clipping mask or a blending mode, an image and a shape, they're different files, right? An image is a raster object and a shape is a vector object. And so they can't really intertwine that much. Okay, so I'm going to make 2 circles. And just do that. Okay, so I have 2 circles on top of each other. Is everyone able to pull up their Pathfinder window? Okay, so I'm going to select both of those shapes. And now we have a bunch of different options. They're a little difficult to navigate, but as you use them, you're going to become familiar with their icons, and you're going to be able to recall what they do as you use them more and more frequently. So the first thing, starting from the left, moving to the right, maybe I should just make a bunch of copies so that pressing Control D to make a copy, and then that way I can have a bunch of shapes to show you guys how this works. Okay, so I'm going to select 2 objects, and I'm sure most of you have already started just clicking. So the first thing we do is join. What happens when you join is that you join both of those objects. Their paths now cross, and now you have a closed shape and with the same fill and same outline. Okay. Now the next one is called minus front, which means that the thing on front is going to be deleted and also knock out any overlapping area or surface area of the shape under it. So if I hit minus front, that's exactly what happened. It looks like a cookie bit out of it. Abigail, if you could put that in the Q&A chat, but Abigail asked, how do you do join? So you have to have your Pathfinder window open. And then the first option to the left, there are 2 rows of options. One's called shape modes, one's called pathfinders. So with 2 objects, you have to have 2 objects selected. And you get your Pathfinder by going to the Windows panel and Pathfinder. Okay. Another way to tell is that it's 2 shapes. Kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's 2 rectangles or squares. I'm sorry. Okay. And that's kind of the icon as it exists in the right-hand toolbar. So it is called Unite. That's true. So that's true. I misnamed it. Okay, so the first thing is Unite or join, and that joins the 2 shapes. The next thing is called minus front, which means that the the shape underneath will get the overlap of the 2 shapes will get knocked out. Okay, so it will delete it. So now we have this kind of cookie area. Okay, the next thing that we have called intersect. Brilliant, right? Now I have this leaf. I want to make sure I call it by its list the name over here. So but two shapes, and then it will knock out both non-overlapping areas and only keep the overlapping area. So I'm just moving from right. Again, we're moving from the left hand area, and we have two shapes over each other, overlapping. That's important. They have to overlap. And then I'm selecting both of them and just moving through as I apply the different areas. And I apply the different areas by just clicking on one of these icons. Okay? There's no other process outside of selecting the two shapes, and I can show that to you right now. Okay, so this is what happens when you intersect two shapes, and now we have a leaf looking shape or eye looking shape. Now let's select, again, selecting two shapes and exclude. So we can't really tell so much right now, but what happened was it deleted the overlapping shape, right? So while here, this was the only thing that was left, here it was the only thing that was cut out. You can see that if we swap the fill, which is what I just did, we have this shape over here. No, I don't think if you group them, no, it doesn't matter if you group them. I just wanted to make sure it doesn't matter if you group them. Because when you group them, all you're doing is it's just a way of organizing, but it doesn't actually change the properties of the shape. What we're doing right now is we're actually deleting parts that you cannot put back unless you undo that action. With grouping, it's just another way of just keeping a bunch of stuff together. You can group shapes, text, and an image all together in one group and then move it around at the same time. But what we're doing here is we're basically creating brand new shapes. This is a new shape, right? Okay, so we just went through kind of this is what happens when you go through the top row of our Pathfinder window. And I want to, now let's go through the bottom row of our Pathfinder window. Some people have questions. How do you ungroup items when you align them? I don't know what that means. Okay, so let's first just run through everything here. Okay, so then this next area, in my mind, like the way I use it, I don't really like separate them in two different categories, but just see what happens. So here, this doesn't really change. I guess it does. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so first is divide. What that means is that when I have two overlapping shapes, it's now going to make new shapes out of it, but it's going to keep all of my shapes there. So while at the top row of our Pathfinder window is very destructive, it kind of removes kind of the edges of my circles here, or knocks out a shape over here, right? The bottom row somewhat maintains it. So when we click divide, what just happened was, when we divide things, it groups it. What just happened was it cut everything apart into neat pieces. The way you ungroup things, if you have a question about ungrouping, there are two ways, right? So you can right click, ungroup with your object selected. You could right click, or Control Shift G, right? So if you want to group something, it's Control G, and then to ungroup something, it's Control Shift G. Okay. Now I have these different pieces. So this is divide. Again, we're just running through it. I just want you guys to be familiar with it. Okay, but this is hard to show. So how do I? Right, okay, fine. So with trim, which is the area right next to divide, so again, we're bottom row and we're moving left to right. We hover over, it says trim. Just make these black. I think it's easier to see. Okay, so right now we have two full circles layered on top of each other. When we click trim, it makes, I have to ungroup. It's not the best, this is not the greatest example, but what it does is that it cuts along the lines of the overlapping shapes. So now that you don't have anything overlapping, you have like two different shapes. Kind of looks like one circle is eating the other. But if you see that we didn't really have that, yes, that's a distinction, right? It takes the paths of both of those shapes and cuts it out. I think that the inverse would have happened if we had this circle on top. Ungroup, right? It takes the top shape, knocks out the back. And these are stuff that I don't even use. This is merge. I'm not exactly sure how it's very different than unite. I'm sure it is. Okay, at this point, these are things that I don't even use. This is crop, right? So it adjusted, it took the overlapping shape and cropped it out. Running out of circles over here. Just gonna run through it. Okay. Outline. Basically knocked out the fill, I think. Yeah. It broke it down into all the overlapping parts. It broke down into the outline into separate pieces. And then finally, minus back, the opposite of minus front. I have no idea why they're on different lines. It's very confusing. I feel like these all fall into the same category. Okay, so those are a bunch of different things. That's a ton of stuff. And the only real way to be comfortable, familiar with it, is to practice and do it a bunch of times. That's the only way. There really isn't, I don't really use any shortcuts when I use these, so there really isn't a way to get any more proficient and fast in using the Pathfinder tool outside of just doing it a bunch with a bunch of different shapes. Just have in mind, you can't really do that with an image. Can't use the Pathfinder tool in an image because it's a raster file. Make sure. Okay, so great. Are there any outstanding questions about using the Pathfinder tool that I could address before move on to the next short lecture? Okay, I don't see any questions right now. So I do see a question. Do I? No, I don't. Okay, awesome. But if you do have any questions, feel free to ask. Also, if you have any questions after class, I don't have access to the Q&A chat window after the class is over. But if you do have any questions, you can email me at zevblock@gmail.com and include like visual design course in the subject line so you don't get lost. Okay. Okay, so let me organize these things. So this is going to be a little geared towards like book cover design. I really like book cover design. I like it because it incorporates elements of concept. There's a conceptual element to it, but then there's also the craft element to it. The reason is because the book cover is the packaging of the book. Right? Packaging, it's meant to present what the product is, but also want to make you buy it. And it's part of the experience of the book, right? A really nice book cover will make us feel really good about buying the book or borrowing the book and reading it. So it influences our experience as readers. But it also will allow for the book to be picked up in the store. Very boring, like a really interesting book with a really bad cover will probably hurt the sales of that book. So book cover design is really interesting to me in that way, because on the one hand, there's a conceptual element to it. It's not just about flash and glitter. It's also about referencing the content of the book. So there's a concept, and then there's also the craft. It's also making it look really good and desirable and appealing to your target audience, right? Because especially a book, they're usually written with a very kind of specific genre and audience in mind, and it's not for everybody. There's usually a specific kind of person that enjoys that kind of reading. And so that the book cover designer thinks about that and thinks about what would appeal to them and also what feels right for this book. So those are kind of two main questions that a book cover designer asks. So let's talk about the different kind of visual flavors that there are. So the first thing is literal, right? Literal, this is going to be a bit abstract, but not too much. So something that's literal means it's very plain, it's very straightforward. It is what it is, right? Apple. Like if this was a poster, this would be a very literal poster. We're titling the object that we're showing. There is no room for confusion. There's also zero attempt at introducing anything other than, the idea that this is a fruit. So immediately, we have to recognize that this is kind of redundant. There's no point in saying apple or presenting an apple. If we wanted to communicate, I don't know, let's say this was a grocery store, right? Either show the apple or write the apple or say apple, but don't do both. It's redundant, and a lot of times it isn't very kind or very, what would be the word? Like you're not expecting, it shows how little you expect of your audience to be so explicit. And so to introduce like more conceptual, sophisticated designs, we try to get behind or away from the literal meaning. Although we acknowledge that there is a literal meaning to things, we try to get a little step away from it and let people tease out what we're trying to say just a little bit. We're not trying to be vague or misunderstood, but we're trying to give people a little bit of a visual puzzle that they can appreciate. And this is specifically prominent in book cover design. It's not very apparent, in an exit sign that has to abide by fire safety hazards. We want that to be very literal, very obvious and direct. But okay, good, covered that. Okay, so either show apple or say apple. So now I want to show you a couple of designs, book cover designs by 3 book cover designers. The one, and I'm not going to call out each one, but I'm just going to say their names, and I want to include links to their websites so you can look at their book covers, either to just enjoy it and to understand what does the work of a professional book cover designer look like, or for the reference for your project. Okay, So the first person, his name is Peter Mendelssohn, and he's really cool. I like his work. The second is Janet Henson. She's a woman. She also does really good work. And then finally, a guy named Oliver Munday. He also does really great work. They also do a little bit outside of book cover design, but a lot of what they do is focus on book cover design. Okay, so the opposite of literal would be suggestive, but the opposite of literal would be, instead of saying it so explicitly, we kind of tease it out a little bit, right? So, right, sushi chef, and then there's this illustration, this very beautiful, very delicate illustration that also tells me probably what the inside of the book is going to look like. It's probably going to look very modern, very sleek. We have a nice sans serif, and we have everything centered. So very kind of not in your face, not provocative. And we have this beautiful illustration that looks like salmon, right? Fresh salmon, referencing sushi, referencing what a sushi chef does. So this takes some creative thinking. It's not just a photo of pre-made sushi rolls. Right? So within that, there's this category of metaphor. And metaphor is very interesting. Metaphor is this idea of comparing two things to bring out a new meaning, right? So when we talk about, I have a bright idea, we're referencing things like sunlight, like lamps, like daylight, right? We have a bright idea. Without the idea, we're in darkness, and then the idea comes along and it clarifies things, right? And that in like cartoons or illustrations, a light bulb references the bright idea. It illuminates the problem area, right? Another example is I'm drowning in work, right? I'm drowning, the experience of being overwhelmed, of not being able to breathe and not being able to enjoy being alive because there's so much work. I'm being dramatic, right? But these are all examples of metaphors. We're using the characteristics of drowning to explain how we feel under work. And finally, there's the example of all the world's a stage, right? And we're the actors and yada, yada. All the world's a stage, right? So we're using elements. There are certain details and things related to stage acting and to theater. And then the person who said this is applying it to life and applying it to the world and applying it to how we're actors. And if we're actors, what does that mean? Oh, we have masks and we have costumes, and we probably are already interpreting what masks mean. But it's interesting that we have to employ those things in our design, right? So this is a book cover, right? Time Travel by James Gleick. And these little yellow bars, right? And this is mostly typographic design, but they represent portals. And we can see like James, right? It's appearing and kind of weaving through these time portals, time travel, right? So instead of showing a big, ugly machine made with silver foil, we're showing how the type itself, the words on the page, the title, is traveling, right, through portals. And how about this? This is versus silence, just a hand going over some lips, silence in the age of noise. We have this very calm and serene cover, right? Very sparse, and look at the leading. There's a lot of space between the leading, letting the type and the title breathe, right? And everything about this was designed to be kind of not in your face, right? Using very bland sans serif and a very peaceful, almost probably generic photo, right? How about this? This is an example of draw your weapons. I have no idea what the book is about, but there's a relationship, a metaphor between bullets, and then we have the paintbrush. Draw your weapons as a reference to weaponry, guns, and then there's draw like art. And how about this for a book called The Idiot, right? So idiots, like thick, like a rock. So instead of showing somebody who doesn't look very intelligent, they're presenting the rock, and almost like that's the biggest insult to whoever this book is about. to whoever the character is about. Whoever the idiot is in the story, they're like a rock, they're stiff, they're heavy, right? But they're also not using a very ugly rock. So we can think maybe the book is about someone who's an idiot, but someone we can also love, right? This is the final one. This is an example, a brief history of everyone who ever lived. The story in our genes. So again, I have no idea what this book is about, but they're using just the title and then the introduction of what looks like a family tree to tell us or show us a little bit about, illustrate a little bit about what the book is. And we can tell that this is more academic, probably. I assume this is nonfiction, and I'm just telling based on the coloring and the traditional serif typeface. And you know, it looks like I probably won't be reading this book. It looks a little bit boring, but it also tells me exactly what it is. And also whoever wanted to read a book like this, they would probably appreciate that there's some art and sensitivity to the topic. It's not just this boring thing. Okay, so that is that lecture. I'm going to include, I think I already did, but I'm going to make sure to include the links. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about, I don't know if we have time for another exercise, but we'll see. I wanted to talk a little bit about, so we made a mood board last week. And however you went about it, if you did go about it for this book project, that's up to you. But how do we turn a mood board into sketches, right? So how do we turn, so the way to get a good idea is to come up with a lot of ideas. And that means that you have to start putting a ton of different ideas and many different variations to paper. And I would suggest when you try to come up with ideas, you start it with paper. You start it with not a computer, okay? And the way I would do it, and I am thinking of, maybe I'll just include like a template that you could print out, but I would do something like printing a 8.5 by 11 paper with a bunch of these squares, and then writing out in any different way. You can, and it can be at any different quality, but maybe just doing penciling in the typography or penciling in the illustration. You can just draw a circle and say image over here or something like that. So someone asked, there should be a maximum of 3 fonts on the design. So that is a good place to start, but let me get to that in just a second. So what I'm presenting here is basically, if anyone wanted my strategy, honestly, for how do I come up with tons of ideas and how do I start conceptualizing tons of ideas, right? We just looked at a bunch of book covers. Oh, there's so many ways we could go about this. Yes, and you should actually go and kind of design it on paper. Take a pen or a pencil and just, you know, I suggest like printing something like this. I guess I could upload a template and just, you know, chicken scratch or whatever, any level of quality before you start designing it in a computer. Okay, so someone asked, I once heard that there should be a maximum 3 fonts on a design. Is that true? I don't think there are any rules to design. So there is like I can recommend kind of like if you're just starting out and you're not, you know, you're still learning how to use typography in a terrific way, I would suggest sticking to 2 fonts, maybe even challenging yourself to only use 1. And just using different, well, use one typeface and then use maybe 2, 3 different fonts, different weights, right? So you have thick, thin, you have italic, these are all things that you can use. There are very beautiful designs with many different fonts, with 16 different fonts. There's no reason why you shouldn't be, but at the same time, the more fonts you use, the more visual detail you're introducing. So that has to be something we're conscious and aware of. So I wanted to give this time to answer any outstanding questions people had. I know I didn't answer every question that people posed, so I want to make sure that that's answered. I see someone is raising their hand. Do they want me to allow them to talk, or are they just raising their hand since a while ago? Okay.
Hello?
Hi. Yeah.
Okay, could you tell me when you have two shapes, can you just tell me how to select both? Whenever I try, either one of the shapes gets selected, but both don't. How do you do it?
Okay. Let me make two shapes right here. Two circles. Okay. So there are two ways to do it. One is you drag your mouse over both of them, and you have to cover both of them, right? Here, I'm only selecting one, I'm only selecting another. But how do I tell Illustrator I want to select both? I have to either move my mouse while dragging, I'm clicking and dragging to kind of create this little box, okay? That's one way. Another way is I can click, I select one shape, and then I can hold shift down and select another. When I hold shift, this also works on your computer, like when you're selecting files. If you want to select multiple files, you select one file and then you hold shift and you can select another file. Or I think maybe control on your file browser. Were you able to follow along with that?
Yep. I mean, the second part now with the shift, no, I'm trying to do it. It doesn't go. Again, how do you do it? You select.
Okay.
And then
So let's select. Yeah, you hold shift and then you click on the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. Now it went on. Okay, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. I also, I'm kind of sneaking this in, but I also uploaded a photograph to the Google Drive, and I presenting it as like a really small project. If anyone wants to redesign it, I thought it would be kind of interesting. This very big sign that I found as I was walking down the street, and I thought that if anyone wants to go ahead and try to redesign it, following the different things that we just covered, right? So we have symmetry and asymmetry. We have 3 levels of importance, first, second, and third. We can use serif and sans serif. We can use size, we can use weight, we can use different kinds of fonts. So I uploaded the image, you can download it and challenge yourself. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. So I was thinking of covering someone asked a question about the pen tool. I was thinking about covering the pen tool today. I didn't get time to, but I want to cover it next class. So thanks for reminding me. But now that you asked it, the way you get out of the pen tool is you can just press escape. No, I'm sorry. You press V or I'm still within the pen tool. Me. Okay, so I'm in the pen tool and I'm making shapes, and as long as I don't select anything else, I'll remain within the pen tool. The way to get out of it is just hit V on your keyboard, and that will pull up your kind of default selection tool. Okay. Did that work? It's V on your keyboard. Okay, great. Are there any other outstanding questions? Also, feel free to email me with any questions that you may have in between this class and Thursdays. Okay, awesome. Okay, everybody, good night, and I will see you on Thursday. And feel free to reach out to me via email with any questions.